Welcome to The Know. I'm Ashley.
I'm Mica.
Look, we've had a whole lot of talk lately about whether or not single-player games are in jeopardy. Everyone's moving to multiplayer, seems like. Now, one developer that's been known for its single-player titles has explained why they're cashing in their chips and migrating to multiplayer experiences.
The reason? Well, single-player games are too damn expensive.
Print it!
And player expectations are getting too damn high.
Print it!
To make them to be a viable option for developers. So another one bites the dust, and it's all because you greedy gamers want way too much for your $60. But of course, that's not exactly what the developer is saying, and there's a whole lot more meat to the issue
There's
than
some
that.
nuance.
But how's Ma gonna talk like this?
So these new comments come from Remedy Entertainment's head of communications, Thomas Puha. Yes, the Remedy that is traditionally known for story-heaven single-player experiences like Max Payne, Alan Wake, Quantum Break.
Puha recently had an interview with GameIndustry.biz where he chatted with the outlet about the changing nature of the industry and why his company has had to pivot to a multiplayer-focused game for its next project. In the interview, Puha talks a lot about some of the things that gamers have been worried about over the last few months. Namely, that it's just getting to be too hard for a lot of developers to focus on single-player games anymore.
Now, according to Puha, the big part of the difficulty is simply because players, well, they got a lot of expectations these days. They want a lot from their games. He told GamesIndustry.biz, the reality is the traditional AAA single-player experience is just really expensive to make. The expectation level from gamers is really high in terms of how long the game is, what sort of features it has, how good the production values are. All those things are very expensive to do.
While you'd think that wouldn't be a big problem, considering that gaming as a medium makes more money than ever and ever, the issue is that the console market hasn't really grown much. Puhan went on to say if you could go back 10 years, you could still say the console market is roughly the same size. In the end, the audience you're selling to is relatively the same size, but the cost of making the game is tenfold these days, so that's an obvious problem.
I can kind of see what he's talking about there. Like right now, for example, we measure PS4 sales to PS2 sales. And we're like, oh, if we can just make two PS2 numbers, that's really amazing. But that does show that it's not growing all that much in terms of overall install base, even though we are seeing games break records in terms of the number of overall sales or the amount of revenue they're generating. A lot of that is coming from DLC and such, not necessarily just straight up game sales. So I can kind of see that. Puha outlined that because of all that, players want to spend more time in a game when they spend their money. And that means you're spending way longer, giving them more tools to play with, a bigger sandbox to play in, things like that, which just gets expensive and very time consuming for the developers.
And all of that's probably why Remedy is pivoting to more multiplayer experiences. They announced back in a blog post in 2016 writing, single-player experience has always been an important focus for us. At the same time, we want to challenge ourselves to find ways to expand these elements to include cooperative multiplayer. We will always strive to be the best storytellers we possibly can, and we want these stories to be shared and elevated through players' cooperation. We believe that a multiplayer experience combined with Remedy's unique world building provides an exceptional environment for that.
And, like many other multiplayer titles, they seem to be, on this one, targeting the likes of the Destinies and the Battlegrounds of the world, or for whatever this next game is. A job description back in November mentioned both of those games when looking for multiplayer designers. So, yep, they're chasing the money after titles like Alan Wake and Quantum Break, which are lovely, but it could arguably, yes, be expensive to develop for what they actually get out of it.
So he does have a point. Are player expectations really that enormous for single-player games? Well, yes and no. It's a common sentiment for many out there that they don't want to spend $60 on a game unless it's something that they're going to spend hours upon hours in. Often, games like Skyrim and The Witcher 3 are held up as the comparison. Without that kind of benchmark, there is a vocal part of the gamer community that doesn't want to invest the money, because if you're not spending 45 hours just trying to be a night stalker, then what's the point?
Well, there was a really weird debate that came up when they were recently talking about the new God of War going to be 25 to 30 hours. And there were two sides of that. There were a bunch of people who were saying, oh, wow, that seems like a lot. And there were a bunch of other people saying, why would I spend money on only 25 to 30 hours? That's not nearly enough to justify the investment. And which is weird when you think about it, because the older God of War titles, they were like 9 to 12 hours. So this is like double what they had in previous titles, and yet suddenly it is not considered enough by a lot of people. And it might not be just some vocal minority of gamers either who are starting to expect more and more from single-player games. For instance, Bethesda's had quite a few single-player focused titles that didn't sell quite as well as some of their predecessors did at launch. Games like Evil Within 2, Prey, Wolfenstein 2. We hear a lot about the Skyrims of the world. They're like, oh, it sold 30 million. Well, last I thought it was like 25, 27 million. Still a lot. And sold more than their predecessors, but there's all these ones that are quietly selling a lot less.
Yeah, these games that were sold well in the single-player realm in 2017 typically had a couple of things in common. Big open worlds, lots of gameplay mechanics, hours and hours of exploration.
Released on every platform imaginable.
Right, exactly, which is why lots of developers, and more importantly, the publishers, the guys with all of the money, are moving away from the more linear, smaller experiences.
However, last year also showed us that smaller experiences can find financial footing as well. For example, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice made quite a few headlines for being a self-proclaimed AAA indie title that managed to move more than 500,000 copies, and it became profitable in just 3 months. 3 months ahead of schedule, too. So that's all great. Great game, very well received. However, I can see why maybe 500,000 isn't going to do much to convince worried developers that this is the hill to die on.
More in the AAA realm, though, Uncharted Lost Legacy was a big budget title that sold for only $40 and only featured around 7 or 8 hours of gameplay total. That was also a big seller for Sony.
True.
Not quite at the level of Uncharted 4, or we would have heard a press release about it by now.
They do love to brag about that
They
stuff.
do, but still a strong seller by all indications, especially without Nathan Drake's ass in the game.
Or his face. You know, just him in general.
Yeah.
Why you gotta reduce him?
Because it's beautiful.
So it's definitely possible to do something on a smaller scale, but it's worth pointing out that Sony can take that type of risk because, one, they have more money to play with, and two, because, well, they're already an enormous brand as the platform. Not everyone else has that luxury.
In general, publishers seem to want the bigger, more open experiences, and in that sense, Remedy is totally right. Those games cost a whole lot of money in order to meet those lofty expectations. You know that giant mountain you're climbing in Breath of the Wild? Yeah, that's expensive.
Mountains are expensive. Although, it may not be entirely fair to blame gamers for falling sales either. Not in this instance, at least. Like, Alan Wake sold more than 4.5 million units. That milestone is from 2015, so it may have nudged upwards a bit more as well. At least, well, until they had to pull the game from sale last year over their music licenses expiring.
Yeah, and Quantum Break didn't come anywhere close to that.
Nope.
Xbox has been tight-lipped about exact figures.
So you know it's bad.
You know it was really bad, but looking at estimates that put Xbox One game sales around 700,000, and Steam Spy numbers look to be around 600,000, a rough ballpark of 1.3 million, and that sounds a lot, but it's a big downswing.
Yeah, it's like a third of what Alan Wake did.
Yeah.
But that might not just because people are going away from single player. It might also be because Alan Wake developed a devoted following. It was raved about for its narrative. Everyone really loved it, whereas Quantum Break kind of seemed to come out and face plant a little bit over a bunch of issues. There were control problems, there were glitches, there was requiring an always online connection in order to stream the cutscenes because there were so many variations, and then people just didn't engage with the story the way they did with Alan Wake. There are a lot of factors there. It can't all be blamed on gamers wanting too much.
So hopefully the industry will find a way to balance out all of these things, and sooner rather than later. Unfortunately, it does seem like we have a few more of those experiences on the way in 2018, so you'll get your fancy mountains.
Yeah, what do you guys think of Remedy's comments about player expectations for single-player titles? Let us know in the comments.
For future updates on the biggest single-player games and the biggest single-player mountains, remember to like this video, and if you're new around here, subscribe to The Know.